For a decade, the world saw Julian Croft as a titan of industry, and Eleanora Vance as his elegant, supportive wife, the perfect power couple. Their life was a carefully curated masterpiece, crowned by a sprawling Napa Valley estate that was the envy of California. But masterpieces can hide ugly truths within their brushstrokes. What happens when the king decides to sell the kingdom without telling his queen? This isn't a story about a simple marital dispute. It's a story about a multi-million-dollar betrayal, a web of corporate deceit, and the moment a silent partner revealed she held all the power. It all came down to a single meeting, a single folder, and a clause in an agreement that a self-made millionaire never ever bothered to read. The California sun was different at Ethelgard Estate. It wasn't the harsh, bleaching light of Los Angeles or the tech-filtered glare of Silicon Valley. Here in the heart of Napa, the light was golden, syrupy, and ancient. It dripped through the leaves of 100-year-old oak trees and pooled across the rolling vineyards, making the grapes look like tiny, dark jewels. This was Eleanora Vance's sanctuary. To the outside world, she was Mrs. Julian Croft, the beautiful, poised wife of the tech mogul who had revolutionized data logistics with his company, Innovate Dynamics. Julian was a force of nature, a man whose ambition burned so brightly it cast everyone else in shadow. He was handsome, charismatic, and possessed a relentless drive that had turned a garage startup into a billion-dollar empire. Eleanora, a former corporate lawyer from a family of old-money jurists, was seen as his perfect counterpart, the calm to his storm, the grace to his force. Their life was a whirlwind of galas in San Francisco, board meetings in New York, and winter holidays in Aspen. But Ethelgard was their anchor. They had bought it 10 years ago, a sprawling, slightly neglected vineyard that Eleanora had lovingly restored. It was supposed to be their end game, the place they would grow old long after the frantic energy of Innovate Dynamics had settled. It was more than property. It was a promise. Lately, however, the promise had begun to feel hollow. The golden light of Ethelgard seemed to illuminate cracks in their perfect facade that were invisible elsewhere. Julian, once a man who shared every triumph and fear with her, had become distant. He was a ghost in their 15,000-square-foot home, his presence marked only by a hastily discarded suit jacket or the lingering scent of his expensive cologne. The late-night calls started 3 months ago. He'd take them in his study. The heavy oak doors shut his voice, a low, urgent murmur that even the thick walls couldn't completely silence. When she asked, he would wave a dismissive hand. "Just putting out fires, darling. The European expansion is a beast." But Eleanora had been a lawyer for 8 years at Sullivan and Cromwell before she'd met Julian. She knew the sound of a business deal, and this sounded different. It sounded like desperation. Then came the new security protocols on his personal files, and the sudden unexplained trips to the Cayman Islands logged in his private jet's flight plan as investor meetings. This morning, the chill between them was palpable. Julian stood by the panoramic window overlooking the valley, dressed in a crisp Tom Ford suit that looked jarringly out of place among the rustic elegance of their home. He was sipping an espresso, his jaw tight. "You're leaving again?" Eleanora asked, her voice calm. She was arranging a bouquet of roses from her garden, the thorns pricking her fingers. "Just for the day, a final meeting on the merger," he said, not turning to look at her. "Something big is closing. For us." The word merger was a lie. Innovate Dynamics wasn't merging with anyone. She knew this because she still had friends in the financial world, and a deal of that magnitude would have produced whispers. The market was silent. "That's wonderful, Julian," she said, her tone even. "We should celebrate tonight. I can open the 15 Cabernet we've been saving." He finally turned, a flicker of something. Was it guilt crossing his face before being replaced by his usual confident mask? "Tonight's not good. I'll be late. Don't wait up." He walked over, kissed her on the cheek, a dry, perfunctory gesture that felt more like a business transaction than an act of affection, and was gone. The roar of his McLaren 720S tearing down the long gravel driveway was the only sound he left behind. Eleonora stood perfectly still, a single red rose in her hand. The promise of Ethelgard, the dream of growing old together, felt like a story she had read in a book about someone else's life. She knew with a certainty that settled like ice in her stomach that Julian was not just hiding something from her. He was actively dismantling their life, piece by piece, right under her nose. The question was, why? And more importantly, what was he selling? She walked to the window, watching his car disappear. The sun glinted off the polished leaves of the vines that were the soul of this place. Her place. A cold resolve began to form within her. Julian may have been the king of his tech empire, but this vineyard was her kingdom, and she would not let it fall without a fight. The first rule Eleonora had learned at law school was simple: never operate on assumption. Always follow the evidence. Her husband was a stranger. The home felt like a hotel, and her intuition was screaming. It was time for evidence. Her first call was not to a private investigator, but to someone far more reliable and discreet, Marcus Thorne. Marcus had been her mentor at Sullivan and Cromwell, a silver-haired, impeccably dressed lawyer who saw the law not as a set of rules, but as a chessboard. He had been a close friend for nearly 20 years, and was one of the few people who saw her as Eleonora Vance, the brilliant legal mind, not just Julian Croft's wife. They met at a quiet cafe in Sausalito, a place of salty air and fog-muted sunlight, far from the prying eyes of their social circle. "He's hiding something big, Marcus," she said, her voice low after the initial pleasantries. "His company's numbers are stellar, at least publicly. He's not having an affair, I'd know. It's financial, and it feels existential." Marcus took a slow sip of his black coffee, his eyes sharp and analytical, studying her face. "Existential how? Like he's trying to stop a tidal wave with a bucket. The secrecy that trips the tension. It's the behavior of a man on a ledge. He mentioned a merger, but there's no chatter. None. It's a phantom deal. Or a private one," Marcus countered gently. "An off-market acquisition. But you're right, even those leave a trace. What do you want me to do, Elle?" "I need to know what he's doing," she said, her gaze firm. "I'm still on the board of the Croft Family Foundation. It gives me access to certain financial overviews, but he's locked me out of his personal servers. I need you to find a way in, legally if possible. I also want you to look into Ethelgard. Every deed, every title, every document associated with its purchase." "The vineyard?" Marcus looked surprised. "You think this has to do with the estate?" "Ethelgard is our single largest private asset," Eleonora explained, a knot tightening in her stomach. "It's worth north of $50 million, maybe more in the current market. If he needed liquidity fast, and he wanted to do it quietly." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Selling off a major real estate asset was faster and more private than selling a block of company shares, which would trigger SEC filings and spook the market. Marcus nodded, his expression turning grim. "I'll get my forensic accounting team on it. We'll be discreet. What about you?" "I'm going to do some digging of my own," she said. Eleonora's investigation began in Julian's home office, the one place he had explicitly told her to stay out of, citing the sensitivity of his work. Waiting until she knew he was in a day-long meeting in the city, she entered the room. It was a monument to his ego-sleek minimalist, with a single massive desk of polished obsidian, facing a window that framed the Golden Gate Bridge in the distance. She didn't touch his computer. She knew it would be a digital fortress. Instead, she searched for the mundane. The wastebasket. Tucked at the bottom beneath crumpled papers and coffee cups was a receipt from a document shredding service. Dated 2 days ago. Alpha Shred, a premium data destruction service. Why would he need that when his company had its own industrial shredders? Next, she checked the desk drawers. One was locked. It wasn't a sophisticated lock, just a standard key. In their bedroom, she found a box of his old university memorabilia. Tucked inside was a small, ornate key, a key to a diary he kept as a young, ambitious student. On a whim, she tried it. It clicked open. Inside the drawer was not a secret diary, but a single, thin folder. The label on it read, Project Nightingale. Her blood ran cold. Nightingale was the code name they had lovingly given to their plan to build a small, state-of-the-art winery at Ethelgard. It was her passion project. She opened the folder. It contained geological surveys of the estate water rights assessments and architectural blueprints, all the things she had commissioned. But tucked at the very back was something new, a preliminary sales prospectus drafted not by a real estate firm, but by a private equity liaison. It described Ethelgard not as a home or a vineyard, but as a prime under-leveraged real estate asset in a premium Napa location. It listed potential buyers, a who's who of venture capitalists and corporate raiders. And at the top of the list was a name that made her breath catch in her throat. Silas Blackwood. Silas Blackwood wasn't just a buyer. He was a vulture. He ran a ruthless private equity firm, Blackwood Capital, known for buying distressed assets, stripping them down, and selling them for parts. He had no appreciation for history, beauty, or legacy. He saw the world in spreadsheets. If Silas Blackwood was interested in Ethelgard, it wasn't for the wine. It was for the land which he would likely carve up into smaller, soulless McMansions for tech billionaires. The phone rang, startling her. It was Marcus. "Elle, I have something," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "My team got a hit. Julian hasn't been making capital calls to his investors. He's been answering them. Innovate Dynamics is in serious trouble. Their flagship logistics algorithm, the one the entire company is built on, is about to be rendered obsolete by a quantum computing model developed by a competitor in Germany. The news isn't public yet, but the institutional investors know. They're calling in their debts. He's facing a complete wipeout." Eleonora sank into Julian's leather chair, the sales prospectus in her hand. It all clicked into place. The lies, the secrecy, the desperation. He wasn't expanding his empire. He was trying to save it from imploding. "And he's planning to sacrifice our home to do it," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of grief and fury. "It gets worse," Marcus said. "I found the preliminary sale agreement. It's in a blind trust to hide the buyer and seller, but the asset listed is the Ethelgard property. The deal is closing in 2 days. He's arranged a final signing at the estate." 2 days. He was going to sell their dream, their future, from under her feet, in the very place it was born. He was going to bring Silas Blackwood into their home and sign away their life together. The initial shock began to subside, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. He had underestimated her. He had always seen her as the graceful hostess, the supportive wife, the retired lawyer who had left the game behind. He had forgotten who she was. He had forgotten that she was the one who had structured all their personal acquisitions, including their biggest one. "Marcus," she said, her voice now steady and clear as glass. "Pull up the original purchase agreement for Ethelgard Estate from 10 years ago, the one from the Vance Family Trust, and get ready to draft an injunction." A slow smile spread across her face, devoid of any warmth. "I think it's time to remind my husband," she said, "what happens when you don't read the fine print." The truth, when it fully revealed itself, was more devastating than Eleonora could have imagined. Marcus's team worked through the night, and the picture they painted was one of spectacular hidden failure. Julian Croft, the tech visionary, had made a classic mistake. He'd become complacent. He had believed his own hype, assuming his algorithm was untouchable. While he was busy being celebrated on the covers of Forbes and Wired, a quiet German startup had leapfrogged him with next-generation technology. His key clients, who operated on multi-year contracts, had begun invoking exit clauses. Innovate Dynamics wasn't just facing a downturn, it was facing an extinction-level event. The company was leveraged to the hilt. Julian had used his own shares as collateral for massive loans to fund the European expansion. He'd boasted about an expansion that was now a catastrophic money pit. To avoid a margin call that would bankrupt him and collapse the company's stock price, he needed cash. A lot of it. And he needed it yesterday. "He's been selling off everything that isn't nailed down," Marcus explained over a secure video call the next morning. Eleonora hadn't slept. She sat in her own study, a smaller, warmer room, filled with books and art. A stark contrast to Julian's sterile office. Art carves his stake in a smaller biotech firm. But it's not enough. The sale of Ethelgard is his last-ditch effort. Blackwood is offering $65 million, all cash with a 48-hour closing window. It's a lowball offer, but it's fast money. And Blackwood gets to carve up one of the most beautiful pieces of land in Napa. Eleonora said, her voice laced with bitterness. It all makes sense. The lies, the shredding service. He was destroying evidence of his company's failing health so he could secure the private sale without spooking Blackwood. She thought back to all the times she had tried to talk to him about the business, to offer her legal and strategic insights. He had always smiled indulgently. "Darling, don't you worry your beautiful head about it. I've got it handled." He had sidelined her, pushed her into the role of a decorative accessory, while his empire was crumbling around him. The betrayal wasn't just in the selling of their home. It was in the years of condescension and dismissal that preceded it. "So the signing is tomorrow?" she asked, her mind already shifting from emotion to strategy. "Tomorrow at 3 p.m., at the estate." Julian, his lawyer, and Silas Blackwood, Marcus confirmed. "I've reviewed the preliminary agreement. Julian is listed as the sole proprietor of the selling entity, a shell LLC he created last month. He's representing that he has the exclusive and unencumbered right to sell the property." A cold, mirthless laugh escaped Eleonora's lips. Unencumbered. That's a beautiful, legally precise word. And he is about to find out just how wrong he is. She stood up and walked to a fireproof safe concealed behind a painting of the Tuscan countryside. She entered the combination, and the heavy door swung open. Inside was a collection of personal documents, her will, her parents' letters, and a thick, leather-bound portfolio. She pulled it out and laid it on her desk. The embossed gold lettering on the cover read, "The Ethelgard Acquisition, Vance Trust." "Do you have it, Marcus?" she asked. "Right in front of me," he replied. "The digital copy from the county recorder's office. It's a masterpiece of legal fortification, Elle. I'd forgotten how brilliant you were with this." 10 years ago, when they bought Ethelgard, Julian had been in the middle of a hostile takeover bid for a smaller rival. All his capital was tied up. The down payment for the estate, a staggering $10 million, had come directly from Eleonora's personal trust fund, money inherited from her grandparents that was untouchable by marital property laws. Julian, eager to secure the property, had been happy for her to arrange the financing. "You handle the boring legal stuff, honey. You're the expert," he had said already, imagining the parties he would throw there. And she had. She had structured the purchase not as a simple co-ownership, but through a complex, multi-layered trust. On paper, Julian's shell company was the primary beneficiary and managed the day-to-day operations, a structure designed to shield them from certain taxes and liabilities. He had signed dozens of pages of paperwork. She had prepared, his eyes glazing over as she explained the intricacies of asset protection. He had trusted her, but more than that, he had underestimated her. He saw it as her little project. What he had never bothered to read was Article 4, Section B of the founding trust charter. It was a clause she had drafted herself, a piece of legal artistry inspired by her grandfather, a notoriously cautious judge. The clause stipulated that while Julian's LLC held managerial control, the controlling interest, defined as the ultimate authority to sanction any sale, liquidation, or transfer of the core asset, was vested in the source of the initial capital investment, namely, the Vance Family Trust. And the sole unassailable trustee of that trust was Eleonora. Furthermore, any attempt to sell the property without the express notarized and board-ratified consent of the Vance Trust trustee would render the sale agreement null and void, and trigger a penalty clause. Managerial control of the asset would immediately and irrevocably revert to the holder of the controlling interest. In his arrogance and haste, Julian had signed away his power to sell their home without her permission. He had given her a nuclear option, and for 10 years it had lain dormant in a safe, a sleeping guardian of their dream. "He won't even know what hit him," Marcus said, a note of admiration in his voice. "He will see it as the ultimate betrayal," Eleonora said quietly, tracing the embossed letters on the portfolio. "But he is the one who lit the match. He's planning to sell our future to a man who will turn it into a parking lot. This isn't just about money or a house anymore. It's about the promise." Grief still clung to her, a heavy cloak of what might have been, but beneath it, the old fire was kindling. The lawyer, the strategist, the woman who could see 10 moves ahead on the chessboard, was reawakening. She was no longer just Julian Croft's wife. She was Eleonora Vance, and she was preparing for war. "Marcus," she said, her voice hardening into steel, "don't file the injunction yet. An injunction is a warning shot. I don't want to give him a warning. I want him to walk into that room tomorrow believing he is king of the world. I want him to shake Silas Blackwood's hand. I want the ink to be wet on the page." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You want to let it get that far, Elle? That's incredibly risky." "It's not a risk," she corrected him. "It's a statement. He is going to be publicly and humiliatingly exposed in front of the one man whose respect he's desperate to have. I'm not just going to block the sale, Marcus. I'm going to take back my kingdom." The next 24 hours were a masterclass in controlled fury. Eleonora moved through her home with a chilling purpose, a ghost preparing her own haunting. She packed a small bag with essentials not for a trip, but for a new beginning. She went through her shared closets, her shared photo albums, her shared life, and mentally partitioned it all. There was the life she thought she had, and the life that was about to begin. Meanwhile, in his San Francisco office, Marcus Thorne and his team were assembling the arsenal. They prepared 2 sets of documents. The first was a concise, brutally clear legal brief. It outlined the structure of the Ethelgard Trust, highlighted the controlling interest clause, Article 4, Section B, and cited the relevant case law that made it ironclad. It included certified copies of the original trust agreement, complete with Julian's flourishing, confident signature on every page. It also included the notarized resolution from the Vance Trust Board, which consisted of Eleonora and Marcus formally refusing consent for the sale. The second set of documents was the kill shot. It was a notice of breach of fiduciary duty and an immediate invocation of the penalty clause. Upon Julian's attempt to execute an unauthorized sale, this document would legally strip his LLC of all managerial rights over the estate and transfer them directly to Eleonora. In essence, the moment he tried to sell the vineyard, it would cease to be his to sell in any capacity whatsoever. "Are you sure you want to go through with this, Eleonora?" Marcus asked her on their final call that evening. He was playing devil's advocate as good lawyers do. "You could just serve him the papers now. Avoid the confrontation. It would be cleaner." "Cleaner is not the point," she replied, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the vineyards in hues of orange and purple. "For 10 years I have been silent. I have been accommodating. I have shrunk myself to fit into the box he built for me. He thinks I am a beautiful piece of art he owns. Tomorrow the art is going to get off the wall and tell him the gallery belongs to her. This has to be done face to face. He needs to see it, and Silas Blackwood needs to be the witness." She spent the evening in quiet preparation. She laid out a dress, not a soft, flowing hostess gown, but a sharply tailored sheath dress in a deep charcoal grey. It was the kind of dress she used to wear when she was walking into a contentious deposition. It was armor. She ate a simple meal alone in the vast, silent dining room, the empty chair opposite her, a testament to all the broken promises. She did not cry. The time for tears was over. The grief had been burned away, leaving behind the hard, unyielding diamond of her resolve. Her final act of the night was to walk through the vineyards. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and ripening grapes. This land was part of her soul. She had overseen the planting of the new Riesling vines, chosen the French oak for the barrels, and knew the name of every person who worked the soil. Julian saw the estate as a status symbol, a backdrop for his life. Eleonora saw it as a living, breathing entity. He was trying to sell a thing. She was fighting for a life. She returned to the house and placed the leather-bound portfolio containing the original wet ink copy of the Ethelgard acquisition agreement into her briefcase. Alongside it, she placed the documents Marcus had couriered over. Everything was ready. Sleep did not come easily. She lay in their cold, empty bed, not thinking of the past, but rehearsing the future. She played out the scene for tomorrow in her mind, over and over again. Every word, every gesture, every possible reaction from Julian. She was preparing not just her legal case, but her emotional one. She needed to be impregnable, a fortress of calm and facts against the storm of his ego and fury that was sure to come. She thought of the name on the file she had found, Project Nightingale. The nightingale is known for its beautiful, powerful song, often sung in the darkness. How fitting, she thought. Julian had tried to cage the nightingale and sell it for parts. He was about to discover that this nightingale had a voice of its own, and it was about to sing. At 2:45 p.m. the next day, a black Cadillac Escalade purred up the long cypress-lined driveway of Ethelgard Estate, followed by a sleek, menacing black Bentley. Julian Croft stepped out of the Escalade, his face a mask of strained cordiality. He was dressed in his signature power suit, a man playing the part of a king, still in command of his realm. With him was his lawyer, a nervous-looking man named David Chen. The Bentley's door opened, and Silas Blackwood emerged. He was a man who seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Dressed in a simple, obscenely expensive dark sweater and trousers, he moved with the predatory stillness of a shark. His eyes, a pale, cold grey, swept over the estate with an appraising, dismissive glance. This was not a home to him. It was a line item on a balance sheet. "Impressive, Croft," Blackwood said, his voice a low gravel. "My development team is already drawing up the plans. The view lots alone will fetch a fortune." Julian forced a smile, ignoring the stab of discomfort at Blackwood's words. "It's one of a kind. The signing room is this way. My wife is away for the day visiting family, so we'll have complete privacy." He led them into the grand library, a room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a cavernous fireplace, and a massive oak table that served as the room's centerpiece. On the table were 2 stacks of documents, a bottle of 30-year-old Macallan, and 3 crystal glasses. It was a stage set for a triumphant execution. David Chen, Julian's lawyer, began to nervously shuffle the papers. "Mr. Blackwood, the closing documents are all in order. A simple signature from both parties is all that's required." "Let's get on with it," Blackwood said, his impatience clear. He had no time for pleasantries. Julian took his seat at the head of the table, his chair positioned as a throne. He picked up a heavy, gold-plated Mont Blanc pen, a gift from Eleonora on their 5th anniversary. He felt a pang of something, guilt perhaps, or regret, but pushed it down. This was about survival. Eleonora would be upset, furious even, but she would understand eventually. He would buy her another vineyard, a bigger one once he had saved his company. He was doing this for them, he told himself. He uncapped the pen. The room was silent save for the rustle of paper. This was it, the moment that would save him. And then the heavy library doors swung open. Eleonora Vance stood in the doorway. She was not the wife he had left 2 days ago. There was no softness in her expression, no hint of the gentle hostess. She was dressed in the charcoal grey sheath dress, her hair pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. Her face was calm, her posture radiating an authority he hadn't seen since her days in the courtroom. In her hand, she carried a slim leather briefcase. Julian froze the pen, hovering over the paper. A wave of pure shock, followed by white-hot anger, washed over him. "Eleonora, what are you doing here? I told you I had an important meeting." "You did," she said, her voice cool and even as she walked into the room. Her eyes met his, and for the first time he saw no love, no warmth, only the cold, dispassionate assessment of an adversary. She didn't spare a glance for his lawyer. Her gaze moved to Silas Blackwood. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her tone polite but firm. "I'm Eleonora Vance. I do apologize for the interruption, but I believe you are operating under a significant misapprehension regarding the asset you are attempting to purchase today." Blackwood leaned back in his chair, a flicker of interest in his cold eyes. He was a man who appreciated high-stakes drama. "Is that so?" Julian shot to his feet, his face turning red. "Eleonora, this is a private business matter. You need to leave. Now." She ignored him completely. She walked to the opposite side of the table, placed her briefcase down, and opened it with a precise click. "My husband has represented to you that he has the sole and unencumbered right to sell this property. I'm afraid that is factually incorrect." David Chen, Julian's lawyer, finally spoke up, flustered. "I can assure you, Mrs. Croft, the title is clean. We did a full search. The property is held by an LLC, of which Mr. Croft is the sole director." "The LLC is the managerial entity, Mr. Chen, not the proprietary one." Eleonora corrected him without looking at him. She slid a thick, leather-bound document across the polished oak table towards Blackwood. "This is the founding charter of the Ethelgard Trust, which is the ultimate owner of this estate. I assume neither you nor your legal team were made aware of its existence." Blackwood picked up the document, his expression unreadable. Julian laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "A trust, Eleonora? What is this nonsense? Some legal garbage you cooked up years ago. It's meaningless. I own the LLC. I own the property. This is a desperate emotional stunt." "Is it?" Eleonora replied, her voice dangerously quiet. She then slid a second, smaller document towards Blackwood. "Please turn to Article 4, Section B of the Charter. You'll find it on page 27. I've highlighted the relevant passage." Silas Blackwood, a man who read 1,000-page contracts for breakfast, flipped to the page. His eyes scanned the text. He read it once, then read it again. A slow, almost imperceptible change occurred in his expression. It was the look of a predator recognizing a superior one. It states, "Eleonora announced to the silent room that the controlling interest of the trust, defined as the non-negotiable right to approve or deny any sale of the core asset, is vested exclusively with the party that provided the initial capital. That capital, $10 million, came from the Vance Family Trust, of which I am the sole trustee." The color drained from Julian's face. He stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. He remembered signing the papers, remembered her talking about trusts and tax benefits, remembered waving it all off as her thing. "This sale," Eleonora continued, her voice cutting through the tension, "was never brought to me for approval. Therefore, it was never legally possible. The contract you are about to sign," she looked directly at Blackwood, "is worthless." The room was utterly still. The only sound was the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner, marking the seconds of Julian Croft's world falling apart. Julian stared at the document in Silas Blackwood's hands, then back at his wife. Disbelief warred with a dawning, horrifying understanding. "You can't be serious," he stammered, his voice losing its commanding tone. "This is a trick, a pathetic attempt to sabotage me." "It's not a trick, Julian. It's contract law." Eleonora said, her composure absolute. She was no longer his wife in that room. She was opposing counsel, and she had him cornered. "You signed it. Your signature is on page 42 and on every rider. You had every opportunity to read it over the last 10 years. Silas Blackwood closed the leather portfolio with a soft thud that echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. He looked at Julian, not with anger, but with a profound, withering contempt. It was the look a master predator gives to a clumsy amateur. "Did you know about this clause, Croft?" Blackwood asked, his voice dangerously soft. "No, of course not. This is her playing games," Julian protested, turning on Eleonora. "After everything I've given you, this house, this life, and you do this to me. You're trying to ruin me." The accusation hung in the air. Eleonora's calm finally fractured, not with rage, but with a cold, righteous fury that had been simmering for years. Ruin you, she repeated, her voice low and trembling with intensity. You were selling our home, our future, behind my back to pay for your mistakes. You were going to let this man, she gestured towards Blackwood, bulldoze our life's work. You lied to me for months. You stood in this very house and treated me like an inconvenient piece of furniture while you plotted its destruction. Do not speak to me of ruin. She took a step forward, her eyes locked on his. You didn't give me this life, Julian. My money was the foundation this house was built on. My work was what turned it into a home. My legal knowledge is what protected it. The only thing you gave me in the end was the profound disrespect of underestimating me. She then turned her attention back to Silas Blackwood, who was watching the exchange with the detached interest of a spectator at a gladiatorial match. Mr. Blackwood, for the sake of clarity, let me present you with this, she said, sliding the final document across the table. This is a notarized and board-ratified resolution from the Vance Trust formally denying consent for any sale of Ithilgard estate. It also serves as a notice of breach, per the penalty clause which you can find in Article 6. My husband's attempt to execute an unauthorized sale means his LLC's managerial control over this property is as of this moment terminated and has reverted solely to me. She finally looked at Julian, letting the full weight of her words land on him. This isn't just my house to stop you from selling, Julian. As of right now, it's just my house. Period. The silence that followed was absolute. David Chen looked like he was about to be physically ill. Julian Croft, the titan of tech, the master of the universe, looked utterly broken. He sank back into his chair, the golden pen slipping from his numb fingers and clattering onto the oak table. He was defeated. Not by a market competitor, not by a hostile board, but by his own wife, using the very tools he had dismissed as unimportant. Silas Blackwood stood up, adjusting the cuffs of his sweater. He gave Eleonora a long, appraising look. It was a look of pure, unadulterated respect, the respect of one apex player for another. Mr. Croft, Blackwood said, his voice flat and final. My interest in this property was predicated on a clean, swift transaction. This is the opposite of that. You have wasted my time. He paused, looking at the spectacular mess of Julian's life laid bare on the table. You represented yourself as a serious man. You are not. Without another word, Silas Blackwood turned and walked out of the library. His footsteps were silent on the thick Persian rug. A moment later, the sound of the Bentley's engine starting and driving away was the only sound. The deal was dead. Julian didn't move. He just stared at the worthless contract on the table, the monument to his own hubris. He had lost everything in the space of 10 minutes. The money, the estate, the respect of a man like Blackwood, and the woman sitting opposite him. Eleonora calmly gathered her documents, her hands steady. She placed them back in her briefcase and snapped it shut. She looked at the man she had once loved, now a stranger hollowed out by his own greed. There was no triumph in her eyes, only a deep, profound sadness. The locks will be changed in an hour, Julian, she said quietly. Have one of your assistants pack your things. They can be collected from the gatehouse tomorrow. She turned and walked towards the door, her back straight, her steps measured. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The battle was over. The kingdom was secure. The hour after Julian's world collapsed was the quietest Eleonora had ever experienced at Ithilgard. The departure of Silas Blackwood had sucked all the tension from the air, leaving behind a sterile void. Julian remained seated at the great oak table, a man turned to stone the useless Mont Blanc pen, still lying where it had fallen. He didn't speak as Eleonora laid out the terms of his departure. He didn't protest. He simply stared at the grain of the wood, perhaps seeing the patterns of his own ruin within it. The locksmith, a discreet professional she had called an hour earlier, arrived on time. The sound of the old locks being drilled out and replaced was methodical final. Each metallic click was a punctuation mark at the end of a long, painful chapter. Eleonora supervised the packing of Julian's immediate effects herself. She moved through their cavernous bedroom, directing a small team of her most trusted staff to pack his suits, his shoes, his collection of ostentatious watches. She felt surprisingly little. There was no rage, no lingering affection, just a profound sense of detachment, as if she were archiving the possessions of a man who had died long ago. His final act of communication came not as a roar, but as a whimper. An hour after he was escorted from the property, her phone buzzed with a text message from him. "You have destroyed me. I hope you're happy." Eleonora stood on the veranda, looking out at the vineyards that were now unequivocally hers. She thought for a moment about the years of shared laughter, the dreams they had once built together, the man he had been before his ambition consumed him. A wave of sorrow, brief but sharp, washed over her, not for the man he had become, but for the one she had lost along the way. She typed a simple final reply, her fingers steady. "I did not destroy you, Julian. You sold your own foundation. I simply chose not to be buried in the rubble. Goodbye." She then blocked his number, a simple digital act that felt as momentous as the changing of the locks. The next morning, the storm broke. The Wall Street Journal ran the story, an exposé sourced from high-level investors who were jumping from the sinking ship that was Innovate Dynamics. The headline was Brutal Titan's Downfall. How Julian Croft's tech empire became a house of cards. The article detailed the obsolete technology, the mountains of debt, and the desperate failed attempt to liquidate a private asset. A Napa Valley estate, it noted cryptically. The press descended on Ethelgard's gates like vultures. News vans parked along the county road, their long-lens cameras aimed at the house. Eleonora, who had once been photographed as a society wife at galas, was now the subject of intense, ravenous speculation. Was she the wronged woman? A co-conspirator? The secret mastermind behind his downfall? Instead of hiding, Eleonora took control of the narrative. She didn't release a statement through a lawyer. She called a single well-respected journalist from a major financial magazine, a woman known for her integrity. She invited her to the estate. They didn't sit in a sterile office but walked through the vineyards. Eleonora, dressed in practical jeans and boots, spoke not of her marriage, but of her business. Ethelgard Estate was never merely a personal residence. She stated, her voice calm and clear, recorded for the article. It was a significant investment, structured and protected by the Vance Trust from its inception. The Trust's actions last week were not personal. They were a necessary fiduciary step to protect its primary asset from a catastrophically ill-advised and unauthorized sale. The resulting article portrayed her not as a victim, but as a shrewd, decisive leader. The story shifted from a marital drama to a stunning lesson in corporate governance and asset protection. In the cutthroat world of finance and tech, she had earned something far more valuable than sympathy respect. While the world watched Julian's empire crumble into bankruptcy proceedings and lawsuits, Eleonora turned her focus inward to the soil. Her first official act as sole director was to call a meeting of the entire estate staff, from the vineyard managers to the groundskeepers. They gathered nervously in the main courtyard, many of them loyal to Julian, unsure of their future under her new regime. She stood before them not as the lady of the manor, but as their new partner. "I know this has been a difficult and confusing time," she began, her voice carrying in the still morning air. "Many of you were hired by Mr. Croft, and your loyalty was to him. I understand that. Today I am asking you to shift your loyalty not to me, but to this—" She swept her arm out, indicating the acres of vines shimmering in the sun. "To this land." Julian saw Ethelgard as a symbol of what he had achieved. "I see it as a legacy we will build together. I don't just want to make wine. I want to create the truest possible expression of this place. I cannot do that without you." She spent the rest of the day walking the rows with her vineyard manager, a weathered wise man named Luis, who had been skeptical at first. But as she spoke of soil composition, of pruning techniques, of the subtle differences between the grapes from the western slope and the eastern plateau, his skepticism melted away. She wasn't playing a role. She knew this land intimately. By sunset, she had earned his trust, and with it the trust of his crew. The revival of Project Nightingale became her obsession. She tore out Julian's ostentatious home theatre and converted the space into a state-of-the-art wenology lab. She personally interviewed and hired a brilliant, ambitious young winemaker named Isabella Rossi, a rising star known for her sustainable, non-interventionist approach. Together, they decided their first vintage would make a statement. They would produce 2 distinct wines. The first, a sharp, unoaked Riesling from a notoriously difficult rocky parcel of the vineyard, she chose to name Retribution. "Isn't that a little aggressive?" Isabella had asked, a nervous smile on her face. "Retribution isn't about revenge," Eleonora explained, swirling a test sample in her glass. "The word's Latin root means to give back what is due. We are giving this difficult piece of land the respect it is due. We are letting it speak for itself without hiding it behind oak and butter. It's a reclamation. It's justice." The second wine was a rich, complex Cabernet Sauvignon, blended from the oldest, most resilient vines on the estate vines that had survived drought, fire, and neglect. This she named Resilience. It was her story, and the story of the land bottled. When the wines were released, the industry was watching. Many dismissed her as a dilettante, a wealthy divorcee with a vanity project. The initial reviews were cautious. But then the awards started coming in. Retribution won a coveted gold medal at an international competition, praised for its searing minerality and purity. Resilience received a 98-point score from a notoriously harsh critic who called it a testament to the power of heritage and the triumph of substance over style. The brand of Eleonora Vance was born not as an extension of Julian Croft, but in defiance of his legacy. Ethelgard itself transformed. The cold, minimalist art Julian had favored was replaced with vibrant works from local artists. The grand library scene of the final confrontation became a place for community hosting literacy programs for the children of vineyard workers. She launched the Ethelgard Foundation, using a portion of the profits to fund scholarships and mentorship programs for women looking to shatter glass ceilings in law business and agriculture. Almost 2 years to the day after the failed signing, Marcus Thorne came to visit. They sat on the same veranda where she had answered Julian's last text, sharing a bottle of Resilience. The estate hummed with quiet, productive life around them. "I saw David Chen last week," Marcus said, swirling the deep red wine in his glass. "Julian's old lawyer. He's with a small firm in Sacramento now. He looks 10 years older." "And Julian?" Eleonora asked, her voice even. The question held no charge for her anymore. It was like asking about a historical figure. "Chen said he's consulting, trying to launch some new crypto venture from a rented office in Austin. He's deep in debt, fighting off the last of the shareholder lawsuits. He told Chen that his biggest mistake wasn't the technology or the loans." Marcus paused, looking at Eleonora. "His biggest mistake," he said, "was that he forgot who he married." Eleonora looked out at the rows of vines, their leaves turning to gold and crimson in the late afternoon light. The statement wasn't a compliment. It was another testament to his arrogance. He still saw her only in relation to him. He still didn't get it. "He didn't forget who he married, Marcus," she said softly. "He never knew." She stood up and walked to the edge of the veranda, leaning against the railing. Her life was not an aftermath. It was not a reaction to Julian's actions. It was a creation forged in fire, built on a foundation of her own making. The setting sun didn't feel like an ending. It was simply the closing of a day, full of purpose, a promise of the cool, quiet work of the night, and the certainty of a new dawn she would rise to meet on her own terms. She picked a ripe grape from a nearby vine, its skin tight and dark, full of potential. She was no longer the queen of a shared hollow kingdom. She was the master of a thriving, authentic one. And it was just the beginning. Eleonora's story is a powerful reminder that the most important agreements in our lives aren't always the ones we sign with others, but the ones we make with ourselves, to be vigilant, to know our own worth, and to never surrender our own power. Julian Croft saw his wife as an accessory to his success, forgetting that she was the architect of their foundation. He broke a promise of the heart, but he could not break the contract written in ink because he never respected it enough to read it. Her victory wasn't just in a courtroom or a boardroom. It was in reclaiming her own narrative. What did you think of Eleonora's strategy? Was it a brilliant masterstroke or a cold act of revenge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of empowerment and consequence resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who would appreciate it, and make sure to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas, where the fine print changes everything. Thank you for listening.